Hey everyone, good morning, good afternoon. This is Nick Shalom. We're gonna get started in about 15 minutes with Chris today. We're gonna have a great discussion on software factory and innovation and security as well. So stay tuned. If you want to share, you here, put your name in the comment section with your organization so we can highlight you on the screen. We're gonna get started in about 14 minutes now. Stay tuned. Hey everybody, good morning, good afternoon. Thanks so much for joining this next episode of In the Nick of Time. We're going to get started in about 10 minutes. Today, we're going to have a great guest again with Chris talking to us about software factories and cyber and how to innovate in a world of bureaucracy and compliance. Is going to be a lot of fun. So stay tuned. We're going to get started in about 10 minutes. In the meantime, if you want to share, you here. Put your name in the comment section below. Also, if you have a question for Chris or myself, you can also ask your question, starting with a Q in the comment section as well. Stay tuned in about 10 minutes. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining this next episode of In the Nick of Time with Chris. Today, we're going to be talking about a lot of exciting topics, including the software factories and the supply chain and cyber. So make sure you start thinking about your questions and put into the comment section below, starting with a Q. Also, if you want to share you here today, put your name and company in the comment section so we can highlight you on the screen. We're going to get started about a couple of minutes now, so stay tuned and make sure you're ready for this exciting next guest in about 2 minutes. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. This is Nick Chalon. Thanks so much for joining this next episode of In the Nick of Time. Today we have a great guest, Chris, who will be sharing with us a lot of his experience and journey and talk about the software factories in DoD, but also supply chain and cyber and a lot of great topics. So make sure you're ready for your questions in the comment section below. Also, if you want to share you here today, put your name and company. We'll be able to highlight you on the screen so we can make sure that people know you're here. Also, of course, not to forget, if you have not done it already, make sure you register to the mailing list. We have about 5,000 people now on the mailing list, but that's pretty shy compared to the 38,000 people we got on LinkedIn. So we need to make sure we're not completely dependent on LinkedIn to decide maybe one day to shut us off. So put your email on that mailing list so you can get a notification also for the next episode and also for the next videos that we publish usually once a week about technical topics. You'll see this week we just published yesterday a video on chaos engineering. So if you don't know about chaos engineering, do that. Also, for people that are struggling sometimes with LinkedIn, make sure you give a shot to YouTube Live. If you see the video being behind and lagging a little bit on LinkedIn, unfortunately, YouTube is the better way. So I have the link on the chat section. If you missed it, just go on LinkedIn, on YouTube, and you can directly access the live show. And usually you should have less latency there. So I put the link again in case you don't have it. All right. So also wanted to point out, if you've not seen it, we just released a new website. Love to get your feedback. That's where we're going to be posting also the videos as well, for you to keep up with some of the learning we're going to be releasing in August. So you're going to see we're going to be releasing a whole curriculum for managers and executives. So technical, but not too technical, but deep enough to be dangerous. So if you want to see the future 45 segments of deep dive DevSecOps / digital transformation / culture, to learn more about how to get this done at scale in your organization, you're going to be able to find this stuff out on the website as well in the next few weeks. So stay tuned for that. Also, if you did not yet subscribe to the YouTube channel, do that. Thanks to the 1,350 subscribers that we have. Like I told you, we just released the chaos engineering video, but if you missed it, we also have a great software bill of materials SBOM video, and also a GitOps video, and service mesh and zero trust and things like that. So if you want to have a quick deep dive under 10 minutes, often 7, 8, 9 minutes, then you can take a look at those videos and tell us what we could improve and what's missing, or what we could change to make it better for you to learn and keep up and move at a pace of relevance. All right, so today I'm pretty excited because we have a guest that's been a long-time friend, and also a very smart individual that's done a lot in his career. So before I bring him up on the screen, I wanted to introduce you, if you don't know him already, but you probably do. But if you don't, you're going to meet Chris Hughes today, who serves as the co-founder and CISO of Aquia. Not Aqua, don't confuse them. There is an I, and you'll see the difference. Chris has 20 years of IT and cyber experience. Of course, active duty in the Air Force, a civil servant in the Navy, and GSA and FedRAMP. And of course, he was then a consultant in the private sector as well, because he never sleeps. I don't know how he gets to do all this stuff. He's also an adjunct professor for the cyber programs at the Capital Technology University of course, University of Maryland Global Campus. So that wasn't enough, of course. And he's a speaker and part of the Cloud Security Alliance Incident Response Working Group. And he served as the chair, the membership chair for the Cloud Security Alliance in DC. He also has a podcast. So if you've not checked it out, I love it. I watch the podcast a lot. He has a co-host and a guest as well. So check out the Resilient Cyber podcast if you've not seen it. And of course, he has fancy certifications, but no one cares because they're mostly worthless. So that's fine. I have the same. So who cares? But you're gonna see is more than just a talker. Chris is a doer, and he gets stuff done. So that's why I'm so excited to have Chris on today. So let's bring him up on the screen. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, I was so excited. Like I said, I've been very excited since we announced that you're going to be coming on the show, because we have so many great topics we're going to be talking about today, and it's kind of a broad spectrum of things. Thanks to your experience, but also thanks to your willingness to discuss some of these topics. And when I, of course, look at your background, love for you to give us, for people that don't know you. Of course, most people know you, but for people that don't know you, give us a little bit of maybe your journey and what took you all the way here.
Yeah, so like I said, I've been in IT or cybersecurity almost 20 years. I started off, a little bit pre-military, but then joined the Air Force and was in cybersecurity there, all the way from everything from a help desk, system administration, network administration, up through, cybersecurity focused roles. Left active duty Air Force in 2012, and then worked in a couple different industry roles, supporting agencies like DISA, and then ultimately became a civil servant with NAVWAR, SPAWAR at the time. And then also worked there for about 4.5 years on cloud security and some early DevSecOps programs at both Navy and Defense Health Agency. And then moved from there ultimately to GSA and FedRAMP, where I became one of the technical representatives on the FedRAMP team, representing GSA on the JAB, reviewing cloud service offerings coming through to get approved. And then worked on some industry roles, with different companies. Some of the folks you've actually had on the show already, working with programs like Platform One, the Space Force, and a little engagement with Kessel Run as well. And then ultimately ended up co-founding my own company named Aquia, where I serve as a CISO and co-founder. And as you mentioned, I'm involved in a lot of industry activities too, like, Cloud Security Alliance. We actually just published a SaaS security governance and best practices white paper. I definitely recommend checking that out. And involved with other groups like NIST, serve as the co-chair for the NIST multi-cloud security working group that they just started earlier this year. And pretty active on LinkedIn, of course, and happy to be here.
Yeah, you're one of the few that manages to keep up with me on LinkedIn. I don't know how you managed to do all this stuff. I'm already pretty busy with LinkedIn alone, but you also add your show, which is also very, very exciting. And your CSA work, and you have a startup, and I don't know how you sleep, or if you do sleep. I don't know. Maybe you're just an overachiever, like we've seen in the active duty. It's kind of when you move from active duty to the boring civilian life. I guess it's a whole different ball game, huh?
Yeah, I have 4 kids, 8 and under, so they don't let me sleep much.
Also,
so,
yeah.
Yeah, I'm awake quite a bit. So yeah. No, I'm just really
And you
passionate
didn't talk
about
about the taekwondo. You forgot about it. Isn't it taekwondo? What is it you do?
Jiu-jitsu.
Jiu-jitsu.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry. Yeah, jiu-jitsu. Yeah.
Yep.
Because that wasn't enough. Like you needed a little bit of martial arts on top of it. Because you were not doing enough. That's good. I like it. But I like that I saw on your LinkedIn also all the time you spend with the kids. It's obviously a big reason as to why also I decided to leave the government. When I started, I had no kids, and now I have 3 kids under 4. With all girls and with twins. So it's always interesting, and having the luxury to be home and spend more time and not having to drive 4 hours a day to the Pentagon is always interesting. But it's funny how you also miss it, right? It's kind of there's always 2 sides of the same coin, huh?
Yes, it's definitely a dichotomy. Anyone that's a parent and has like career aspirations like you and ambitions to make an impact, I'll say for me personally, it's always a difficult, dichotomy of wanting to make an impact and do all we want to do professionally, but ultimately knowing like our number one priority is our kids, and that time goes so fast. So juggling the two is always challenging.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. All right, so we talk about you. Let's talk a little bit about what you've seen, because like you said, you were able to really do a lot across the government, even at GSA with FedRAMP, which is a whole other kind of side of the house, really. So tell us a little bit about what you've seen across the DoD software factories first.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I've spent some time working with Platform One. On the Platform One side, I worked with both the SecOps team as well as the compliance team, focusing on things like standing up the VSOC that they had going on early on there, and engaging with the existing CSSPs, that, for better or worse, maybe weren't where Platform One was from a technical perspective quite yet, and they have been using some legacy tooling and stuff, but I know they've made a lot of improvements. And then also on the compliance side, I had a lot of opportunity to work with the team in terms of fleshing out like shared responsibility models, customer responsibility matrices to show, what you inherit from the IaaS, the PaaS layer, what the mission owner, system owner is responsible for, those kind of things, and mapping security controls to the tech stack at Platform One. And then from there, I went and supported Kobayashi Maru, or Section 31 on the Space Force side. I had an opportunity to work with the DoD or DISA Infrastructure as Code project, which was deploying a declarative state of a CSP. In this case, it was Azure, deploying that for the Space Force. So it was a neat opportunity to get an experience with the Infrastructure as Code initiative coming out of DISA, and see how they kind of scripted that out, how they've mapped the inheritance of controls, how they automated deployment and such. And I think that's a really good opportunity for a lot of mission owners that maybe don't have the technical skills or the resources to do it themselves in many cases. And then ultimately, from there, I'm actually working on the civilian side at the moment. I know we'll probably get to this, but working on the civilian side at the moment with Centers for Medicare and Medicaid on a software factory product called Batcave, which is reusing a lot of the core components of Big Bang. So a lot of similarities there from Platform One as well.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting how kind of all this knowledge is spreading, right? You talked about the DISA team. I love those guys. I spent a lot of time as the co-lead of the DoD Enterprise DevSecOps Initiative with DoD CIO, and of course DISA has been embracing. Funny enough, most people don't realize that, but they've been embracing really kind of the work we've been doing in DevSecOps, and they push this idea of I remember when they brought it up to me, whether or not we should be doing more automation. And of course, ruthless automation is the only answer to that question. So, when they brought up the interest of building this new initiative of building better and streamlined automation IAC to deploy things on different cloud providers. Of course, they started with Azure, but the goal was to be really spreading across all providers. I think that's exactly where we want to be. If you compare with the old DISA, right, that was pushing the stigs, where you had to do manual stigs and enforcement, and really the concept of automation was a foreign concept. That's a massive improvement for the team, right?
Yeah, I think it's a huge opportunity, and you've talked a lot about GitOps and infrastructure as code and compliance as code, and why those are valuable to the DoD and the federal community. And I think it's a lot of organizations don't have the technical skills or resources to stand up a cloud infrastructure from scratch. And ultimately, it leads to a lot of ClickOps and bespoke kind of deployments that are really different, have a lot of variation. For example. So leaning into that DISA infrastructure as code project, it started off with Azure, as you mentioned, but now AWS is now authorized as well, I believe, up to impact level 6, actually, I think.
Yeah.
And, so it provides the mission owner an opportunity to go in there and have that click button deployment to get up to speed quickly, get their cloud environment provisioned, and have those baked in security controls that they can inherit from the DISA's provisional authorization. So I think it's definitely the way to go of the future, and it's going to speed up deployment and lead to a lot of consistency and configuration management and control, for mission owners across the DoD.
Yeah, it's kind of common sense, right? Teams can then focus on their mission software instead of having to build all the infrastructure and platform work, and all the way to the service mesh. It's just so common sense to me. I've always struggled, right, as to why so many teams decide not to reuse code from other teams. You've seen across the department and even outside of the department the lack of talent and resources we have, but yet at the same time, people are building things in vacuums and often not reusing different kind of work being done outside of their teams. I've always tried to find, like, what's the reasoning, or what's the real problem. Some people, of course, say, well, enterprise services are not very good, so people don't want to use them because they usually don't bring the right kind of value. It's not flexible enough. It's too opinionated, right? I would argue that platform one is pretty good, but I'm biased, right? But then you also have people say, well, we have taught the PEOs and PMs and material leaders and all these program managers not to depend on enterprise services because we told them they were not dependable, and often disappear because of funding issues and different things like that. So a lot of the PEOs are just refusing to embrace any kind of enterprise service, which is kind of compounding the problem. But then you also have, I guess, some teams kind of pretty locked into a single company. What I really wanted to make sure with platform one was the ability to be to have multiple companies on contract, so we don't get locked in to a Red Hat or VMware or whatever, right? Having the diversity of options, including the smaller guys as well, and so enabling teams to pick the best tool to get the job done. But I've seen also people get all the training from some of these larger companies, whether it's a cloud provider or a Kubernetes distribution company, and they often are pretty opinionated and then learn things as a one-way street, and they struggle to see that there's other avenues. What do you think? And of course, there is ego. I'm going to argue that there's a decent piece of ego somewhere. But what do you think is really what's preventing teams to collaborate better in a world where we're all complaining about funding and lack of resources?
Yeah, I mean, you raise a lot of interesting points, and from me being on the outside perspective, I've watched some of these tenuous, kind of relationships, and there's been contention, and you know how it is. I've seen you and others kind of go at it online and things like that.
Yep.
But it is an interesting dichotomy in the sense that we have a robust software factory ecosystem. It's been kind of codified in the software modernization strategy. I wrote a good write up on that if people want to check it out. But we have a robust ecosystem, and it's kind of dichotomy where, how many software factories should we have? How many people should be doing their own thing and encouraging adoption within their, department or enterprise or programs, et cetera, versus, pushing people to shared services. And it's interesting because there's no right answer per se, but there's a lot of benefits of reusing what's been done already. We talked about, security control inheritance and declarative code to reuse and such. If everyone's doing that in a silo and doing it over and over again, it's just causing a lot of duplicity, a lot of wasted money and funding and time and energy, where you could just be focusing on higher up the stack and delivering, to your stakeholders, your mission.
There's value really in that, that's commodity code, right? So that's where I struggle. And some people just love, DevSecOps, and they get, in love of the concept, and they just love doing it, and they kind of lose track of the bigger picture of the mission they're supposed to be building. And you mentioned, the tension, and, some of it is due of, to me, I guess, and my ego and my way of doing things, and, I own it. And, I think, the difference I would argue with most others is that I am really not in a situation where I have any kind of conflict of interest. When I was in the government, coming from industry with zero engagement whatsoever with any of these companies or any of the DoD agencies, I had no conflicts whatsoever. It's not exactly the same for everybody else, but I think I tried to really enable everybody to have a chance to participate and collaborate. In fact, we built the committee of practice for DevSecOps, which was really the largest committee of practice of the entire DoD across all engagements, including with NATO and 5I and other agencies outside of DoD. But I'm still trying to find, okay, I'm going to be back in the government sooner than people think, and probably some people are going to be upset about it, but that's okay. Some people will be happy too. I'm happy if it's 50-50, because that demonstrates you're doing something. If 100% of people like you, usually you're not doing a lot of great things, or at least you're not disrupting much, right? So I'm okay with being 50-50. I like a little bit better, but that's okay. But if you look at what people could be doing, right, what would you advise me, right, going back one day to fix, to enable teams to collaborate better?
Honestly, I think it would, ego is a part of that. And like you said, people tend to either love you or hate you, but at the same time, for everything that can be said, you've made quite an impact. And I think it's because you were willing to, break some rules, or just, kind of break from traditional norms that have been established. But I think if you were to go back, like, honestly, like, we've started to see some better relationships between some of the primary software factories like Platform One and Kessel Run and stuff. I would really try to build on that, across not just Navy and Air Force, but Army as well, and try to build those relationships, that rapport, and build that.
How do you convince them? Because I try, like, I would argue, I try like both the carrot and the stick, and every layer above and below, both with me and Jason Weiss, who honestly, if you talk to him openly, he's going to tell you he was also frustrated with the Army, for example. But what can I do tangibly, right? Like, how do you go and change those people's mind? Because I tried it all. I just don't know what could I do to have a different approach. Like, do you lead with join engagements? And I even proposed, for example, to give you a concrete example, I proposed to the Army, right, to do a merged team for Iron Bank, because they were complaining that they didn't have a say in it. So we said, hey, let's do a joint leadership, joint execution team, and staff it 50-50, and just do a joint engagement for the entire program. And they just didn't bite, right? There was no interest. So what am I missing? I must be missing something.
So I mean, I haven't served at the levels of government that you have, but I imagine if you're at a high enough level, you can drive people towards that kind of collaboration. But it is going to take people. We're all, at the end of the day, like technology aside, it's all people and personalities and relationships, and trying to foster those. And that's not always easy, and it's not always possible. Some people will never like you, and they'll never want to work with you. But I think I think if everyone can remember at the end of the day why we're doing this, the mission, the warfighter, and the national security aspect of it, we can hopefully get past those things and collaborate. But I don't have all the answers on that front, of course.
Yeah.
Some people will never want to work
No
together.
one has. People always judge others, and I'm very good at it too, right? But then you go into someone's shoes and you realize it might not be as easy as people thought. And also, people don't have all the data, right? And I've not seen all of the details as to why we got there, right? The good news is when I come back, it's going to be a pretty senior role, much more senior. So one would argue, like you said, is gonna streamline the ability to both convince maybe people to do it proactively, but also use a stick if they don't. So that's good. All right, so you talked about the DoD factory. What also was interesting, right, is you mentioned the engagements you're doing outside of DoD with the .gov side of the house, and obviously I've seen dozens of teams starting to embrace DevSecOps from the VA to IRS to DOJ to DHS and more, FDIC and whatever else. But you have a pretty exciting engagement that you've been working on. And the good news is, while they're not completely reusing everything we do, and that's okay, there is definitely some reuse, and it's moving pretty well. So tell us a little bit about what you've been seeing outside of DoD as well.
Yeah, like I mentioned, I'm working on a program at CMS, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, that falls underneath HHS, and they have some really great forward-thinking leaders there on the technology front, like their CISO Rob Wood and their CIO Rajiv and others within the organization, and some great partners I have on the industry side. And we are reusing a good bit of Big Bang, and we're using Iron Bank containers for Big Bang core components. But it's interesting too because every organization, every agency has a different mission. For example, they're on the federal civilian side, so they're a little bit more lenient when it comes to cloud adoption and using cloud native services, for example, from certain providers, because on the DoD side you have to be portable.
That's the same. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
that's what you do, right? You adjust to the risk and the mission.
Yeah. On the DoD side, obviously portability is much more critical. You have forward deployed.
Yeah, they don't have embedded systems and jets to worry about. So
yeah,
good. I'll take.
So it's been a unique experience in the sense that we've been able to lean into some maybe service offerings or third-party services that maybe weren't available on the DoD side due to the rigorous we can go down the rabbit hole of the DoD SRG and the whole that whole process. But that really,
first thing I'll fix. That's the number one, the SRG. That's it. By the way, you fix that. You fix a lot of things just with one document.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because we always hear from senior leadership, whether it's the Jake or, DoD CIO and all these other folks, how critical cloud is for DoD and mission, national security, things like that, innovation. But we have this cumbersome bureaucratic process that really limits how much, cloud native innovation can reach the warfighter and the mission owner. It really is a massive drag. If you look at something that comes out in the commercial space, by the time it goes through FedRAMP and then DoD SRG, you're talking several years before it can get to the hands of the warfighter. So I think if we can make that process better, streamline that process, whether through things like OSCAL and other, avenues, it would help a ton in terms of getting innovative capabilities to the warfighter and the mission owner.
Yeah, we'll talk about OSCAL and all the kind of the compliance as code. It's going to be game changing, right? I think it's really going to be. I'm so proud of the work that the NIST team has done, and I'm still helping them now because I really believe in it. I've been leading a kind of an engagement on the nonprofit side where we're going to be bringing kind of a repository of packages, not just like we do for Iron Bank for containers, but in this case it would have not just the full SBOM, but also the full mapping of the NIST controls in OSCAL for commercial products and open source products, so they can just be consumed automatically and seamlessly, and it's going to remove the kind of the barrier to entry of the certificate to field and kind of the entire compliance nightmare. So I think that's going to be it's going to be pretty cool. But we have to convince companies to be more transparent, and you've seen me get pretty heated with companies like Atlassian. People think I'm being paid to go after those guys, but that's obviously not the case. I care about security, and I gave them a lot of chances to address their 1,400 CVEs. And the most recent news was Atlassian getting breached, and of course the I2E got breached because of that CVE, and that impacts so many programs and putting critical CUI and L4 and 5 data at risk. And I told people we shouldn't let it be internet facing. Platform One moved it behind the the cloud native access point very early, and people complained, and were mad at me for doing this. But the fact is, if they knew how bad, the cyber state of Atlassian was, they would understand. But how do you find the right, balance, I guess, between kind of cyber and the velocity, and then I'll tell you a little story after you give me your answer.
Yeah, it's definitely a difficult challenge, because you got to align with the organization's risk tolerance, but you also don't want to, like, as I talked about, really drag down and, stifle the innovative capabilities getting to the program offices and the warfighter and such. So just trying to, I think having a lot of standardization around how we do this, automating as much as we can, like you talked about OSCAL and things like that. I think getting software, supply chain security, transparency, like SBOM and things of that nature will help us automate a lot of the review process and just determining the risk associated with software. A lot of those things can lead into the benefits that we're trying to seek of just streamlining that whole process while consuming things in a pace of relevance, but also in a secure fashion too.
Yeah, and what bugs me too, right, is kind of this need of this to come up with additional controls, right, with the FedRAMP process not being good enough, despite the fact that DoD CIO is sitting on the board of FedRAMP with DHS and GSA, right, and then we end up not accepting full reciprocity of the FedRAMP process. I mean, either you fix the controls in FedRAMP, or you do something about it, but you don't create kind of a shadow IT assessment process, right? With like you said, the DISA having to wait first for FedRAMP, and then now you have to do all these other controls if you want to do work for DoD at L4 and 5. And by the way, none of this addresses anything when it comes to the classified side of the clouds. And there's this balance. I always remember the conversation I had with some of the DoD CIO teams, where they were so focused on cyber, they were forgetting about the need to compete and be able to get stuff done, right? And back to the balance between velocity and security, I told them, I said, I'm worried about the DoD getting hacked. And I would argue, despite what you would think is a pretty annoying accreditation process, I would argue our system are still very much insecure. So I'm not sure you're getting to the outcome you're trying to achieve anyways. But I also said I'm pretty worried about getting hacked, but I'm actually more worried that one day we're going to wake up and realize that no one is trying to hack us because we're irrelevant and no one cares. That would be probably a biggest problem than getting hacked.
Yeah, I think a lot of people in the security domain, on the federal, like the public sector side of things, on the commercial side, like you can go out of business, right? If you are not viable, if you don't compete in the market, you go away. On the public sector side of things, we have the ability to really slow things to a halt because we're funded by Congress and such, and the taxpayer. So there's not really a bias to get to the market, to compete and have a fair and open competition per se. So on the federal side, I think cybersecurity, a lot of times, we think of everything as must be secure. But as you mentioned, I think that failing to innovate, failing to stay relevant is a risk. And I think cybersecurity practitioners in the public sector never really think of it from that perspective. We got to meet these controls, we got to check these boxes. But what if we've done all that, but we're decades behind our adversaries at some point because we've dragged everything to a grinding halt?
Yeah, and you're still insecure because honestly, the boxes you're checking are not making you secure; they're just making you compliant. So I'm not sure that it's getting to any of the outcomes we actually need for not only the warfighter but the citizen. And when you look back, right, the issue, of course, is we're not in a ongoing constant fight with the peer adversary, particularly with China. So we don't really know how well or not well we're doing. Unlike the commercial side, they obviously see the competition in real time, multiple times a day, and end up winning or losing bids and whatnot. We don't see the impact yet until it's too late. But when it's too late, you pay the price of not just lives, but you could potentially put the entire nation at risk. And so it's no joke, right? And yet you've seen the complacency, right? And kind of the concept of, hey, that's the way we've always done it. And as you know, the velocity of IT has accelerated such that what used to work and take a few years is now a non-starter, right? How do you reinvent yourself and keep up with what's going on? I know, I used to give an hour a day for people to learn, and that's why I'm doing all these videos and this content, because I feel like this is probably the biggest investment of my time I could, do to give back to people so they learn and know what's going on and keep up with what's going on. How do you do it? How do you, because you at the top of the spear and you manage to do all this stuff and learn. And so how do you tell people what to do and how to learn?
So I don't tell people how to learn per se, but for me personally, like, I'm a very disciplined person. I have been, like, even before I went into the military. So I'm very habit oriented, and learning
Yeah.
is just part of my daily routine. If a day goes by where I'm not learning, I feel uncomfortable and I'm not, happy with
Yeah.
myself. Like, learning is just part of what I do in a daily experience in my life. So I'm always trying to read. I'm always trying to lab. I'm always trying to, watch videos, podcasts, conversations like these, and learn things from other people and hear what they're having success with, what their challenges are, those kind of things. I think, in this career field, things move very quickly, as you know, even without the bureaucracy and things like that. Things move very quickly. And if you're not learning, if you're not trying to stay relevant, your career is going to stagnate. And then in a more broader context, on a macro level, like you said, nationally, we could stagnate. And, national security front, I think that we do have this, level of comfort because we have been a world power. We haven't really had a traditional confrontation with another superpower in that context in quite a while. So we've gotten very comfortable of where we are, and we don't realize necessarily how far we're falling behind. And I think leadership, for some folks like me, it's kind of frustrating because you always hear leadership say the right things. Every year we have another study, another audit, another, a report
We
about
love
how
the
we
study. It's very effective.
Yeah, we study the hell out of the problem, but we never actually do anything to fix it. And it gets very frustrating. And especially if people like me doing the work on the ground, I want to see some changes at a higher level to really empower us as a nation to succeed.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I finally understood after I left the government, maybe a little too late, why we do more studies and why we don't get things done. And there's definitely some people that don't want to take any risk, and they talk the talk and don't walk the walk. But there's the other side, which is honestly just great people that are put in jobs that are really where they have no experience or background on or any understanding of the subject matter. And because we believe somehow that, oh, that's okay because it's just about managing people, particularly when it comes to the material leader and senior material leader inside of the PO shops, those people effectively end up managing people but don't understand the subject matter expertise enough to make the right decisions or guide the train. And so they end up doing a lot of studies because they need to have a lot of data to be able to make those decisions. And it's kind of a vicious cycle, right? And then we end up, with like, all these programs that we created, like ITAS, where I started in DoD, the Air Force was talking about ITAS and okay, we just did the award, the bid this year, but I started, almost 4 years ago. We're already talking about ITAS and the first 2.5, 3 years were, risk reduction efforts. And I was like, what is a risk reduction effort? What risk are we trying to reduce here? But I finally understood, right? They just didn't know what to do. So it's like, okay, we're gonna see what sticks, and we're gonna try a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and see what ends up working. And I can tell you, the problems we're trying to solve with ITAS are the basics 101 of life on the commercial side. Every company has this figured out on the planet. There's just no complexity, no unknown. I mean, the DoD makes it a little bit more complex, but it's not. It's negligible. I could have gone in and in 2 weeks make the decisions and let them run the stuff and be done. But there was no one willing to do it, and that's what you see. It's just this kind of fear of making mistakes, and honestly, you're never at risk. Your job is never at risk for not taking a chance and failing. It's only at risk if you did something a little bit outside the norm, and then you failed. So most people are not going to put their career at risk, and we're barely paying these people market value at all. Probably half of market value, and then we want them to take risk, and then we want them to do all this stuff, right? But how is that fair to the people, right?
Yeah, it's a really interesting and multifaceted problem that you just laid out. Is there's a lot of things that you touched on. Like one is the kind of fix our computers thing. It's really hard to DoD and the federal government has a notorious issue with attracting and retaining technical talent. And it's really hard to do that when you don't even have basic IT services and systems that can function like they would in the commercial side. And then also like the workforce aspect. We have an exponential number of, and I think only 1 of 6 IT professionals in the federal government is under 30 years old. There's an age issue, not that all age dictates like technical competence, but obviously that does play a part to some extent.
Yeah.
I think that we need to get younger leadership, younger, eager, leadership that are willing to take chances, willing to do things differently, into leadership roles where they can drive and make an impact. And then, get people that have technical competence and background in these things into leadership roles too, so that they understand like the decisions that they're doing, they have actual practical experience in that. I know I see it on the cybersecurity side a lot of times, like there's, regulations and policies coming out, and it's been written by, aides or, staffers and so on that don't really have any cybersecurity background. And then you end up with a lot of discoherent, incoherent, kind of policies and processes and regulations, and it just really creates a lot of a bureaucratic nightmare, on the ground.
And do you feel like we're still focusing on the wrong? I mean, the fact that we're still talking about career tracks, where I briefed, maybe 3 DevSecDev on the solutions we had in mind to solve the talent problem of software and data science and AI. And now we see, the NDAA and Congress show up and talk about, creating a career track for AI, but not addressing software, cloud, and data, right? So how do you get to it? AI is magic. I mean, you should know that AI is magical. It's just going to magically, work. It doesn't need cloud. It doesn't need, software. It's just magic. That's how poorly, Congress is educated on the subject. And we're not solving and building that strong foundation, right? It's just not going to work. How do you feel like when you see, a lot of the government people end up leaving, right? You've seen obviously me, but others, right? Jason Weiss, Preston Dunlap, and always, David Spurk, right? Brown, the DIU, director, and all these people. Most of them had pretty alarming things to say. I wasn't the only crazy guy. I guess I was the first one, but after I did it, I maybe more people felt like they could say what they really believed. But how do you feel between you see people leaving? Are they getting replaced? Do you feel like we're losing some of the top cover we used to have to help those people get this DevSecOps stuff done? Dr. Roper, everybody is gone. I mean, really, we only have Lauren left, and what happens when she goes? Are you concerned about kind of the lack of leadership that understand the problem?
Yeah, I'm definitely concerned as like a citizen and a former service member, a veteran, like, the father of 4 children. It's very concerning. I think that we need to, if we have this many people leaving, like you mentioned, like we've seen a whole slew of them all saying similar things. We need people at the higher levels of leadership to take a look and say, okay, maybe we have a systemic problem. With the way we're doing things, it's not this individual per se. Maybe we have a broader issue, but really it's going to take leadership with competence and courage to make the changes necessary to fix things. And it's really discouraging when you see people leaving and saying that they think they can make a bigger impact on the outside than on the inside. It kind of speaks volumes in terms of like, how broken the system is, because, if you're on the inside, you're a senior key leader, you should have the authority and autonomy to make quite an impact. So it is very discouraging, and I hope we can fix it. But, I think it's definitely a difficult problem too.
Yeah, when you look at the complexity and the breadth of the problem, right? I was doing a list, for SecAF and SecDev of my recommendations, right, on how to fix some of that stuff. And it kind of touches everything. I mean, all the way to Congress, right? And maybe we should think again about term limits. I mean, I think most Americans agree with term limits, but of course they're never going to do it because that's not their best interest. But, how do we get to a state where, the DoD CIO is a policy shop. Air Force CIO, unfortunately, is also mostly a policy governance shop. They don't have really a way to tell the PEOs how to build the enterprise IT services and how to run. They can kind of set expectations, but it's anecdotal compared to the contract execution and running the work. You don't see this on the commercial side, right? A CIO on the commercial side is managing the teams, doing operations and doing development and getting stuff done, but that's not the case here. I don't know how we solve it, right? Because now you need to have the acquisition teams empowered with the right leadership, and the contracting side, and the CIO shops and IT, and so it's a multifaceted answer, and not just one person can come and solve the problem. including at pretty significant high jobs, because you take DoD CIO, they can write a bunch of policies. I mean, sure, I could fix the cloud SRG, but the CIO doesn't really buy stuff. And now, with this chief digital AI office, they lost the data side. They lost Jake, and the Defense Digital Service is now part of the CDAO. I had push for software and cloud and zero trust to be moved also to the CDAO, so you can actually solve the actual problem, because I don't know how you get to AI if you don't have a cloud and a zero trust enforcement stack. But and you see this delaying these contracts again and again, and at some point, that's why people don't believe in enterprise services, and they move on and build stuff in vacuum. So we're just shooting ourselves in the foot. And I guess my whole point is to say, we're going to need a bunch of people to come and fix this. It's not going to be just one person.
Yeah, it's definitely not something that one person can fix. And I have seen some, people, maybe that come from the commercial side, make comments on LinkedIn, like, just really negative comments about public sector and federal government service and things like that, and how you should just go to commercial side. But the reality is, if everyone, if every innovative, impactful leader took that perspective and just left, imagine what that would leave us with as a nation, when it comes to national security, citizen services, things like that, social services. So I'm glad that some people decide to stick around and try to fight the good fight to make an impact, because our future as a nation depends on it.
Yeah, and it's people are very short-sighted, right? I think that's kind of the issue too, when you live in the bubble of the commercial side. And maybe I was a little bit of the same, but I kind of understood the importance. That's why I wanted to go and serve after setting my company, right? But really, we're just educating kids to hate America and hate the military. And I remember going to KubeCon, right, and waiting. There was like 2,000 people. That was the most attended keynote of the entire event. My keynote on how did we put Kubernetes on F-16 jets. And after, there was a bunch of people waiting to shake my hands, and that's great. And then you have probably 6 or 7 of those that waited in line, and then when they get to me, they're like, oh, I'm not going to shake your hands, it's covered in blood because you kill babies with jets. I mean, it's the kind of stuff. And it's the same, kids, because they're kids, that enjoy the freedom of what the warfighter are sacrificing themselves to give us, and they just don't understand it. They're in a Silicon Valley bubble. And then one told me they had to leave the keynote to go spend time in the puppy room to get some help from because there's a puppy room. You can go and pet dogs, right? And they had to go and pet a few dogs, because she was traumatized by the fact that the DoD was using open source tools, and then they wanted to change the open source terms and conditions and licenses to not allow the DoD to have access to open source, which kind of defeat the point of open source, because that's kind of the point of IP. But maybe they need some lawyer education too. But how do we educate people, right? Because that's kind of, I can tell you, right, the new generation of data scientists and stuff like that, they completely refuse to even help a tiny bit DoD whatsoever. I mean, maybe they're going to help HHS and stuff like that. They're certainly not going to help DHS. Certainly not going to help DOJ. Certainly not going to help DoD. How do we educate them on what that means to not have a strong military and a strong national security defense?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for everyone's ethical or moral, perspective, but for me, like, I think we need to help ensure people understand, like, just how critical national security is when it comes to having a thriving economy. You look at these, they go to tech and they love those environments and they get to do innovative work and things like that. But our economy and our national security are inextricably tied together. If we don't have a strong national security and national superiority against adversaries, for example, it's going to be very difficult to have a strong economy. And the two are very closely tied together. And I will say, we've seen some tech companies, show aversion to working with DoD, but luckily some of them have changed their mind recently. I've seen that in the headlines, for example, and their leadership has showed support for DoD and the federal government. And I think people are realizing, like, without a strong government, without a strong military, without, national security, it's going to be really hard to have success in the economic side of things, So I think that they're tied together, and we need to make sure people understand that.
Yeah, and it's deterrence, right? We never want to use it, right? But we need to have it. I think it's pretty common sense. what also people, crack me up is when they have no problem working with China. It's just like, you guys have never been there, you've never traveled, you don't know the world. Like, go to Venezuela, go to places like this, come back and tell me how much we struggle. I think if people were able to see more of the world, I think they would come back here and be like, yeah, we're not that bad. We can tell you improve a lot of things, but we're by far the best nation in the world, and people need to realize that. And it's just sad that you have to have, I guess, an immigrant like me tell native, I guess, born American, born in the U.S., that kind of stuff. I find it to be a little bit mind-boggling. It's just what it is, I guess. But let's talk a little bit about your work that you've done on the .gov side. How did you have to convince people to reuse some of the work we've done in DoD, or were they proactively seeking it, or did you feel like you had to sell them on the concept?
So I will say, some others were involved, many folks that you know very well in terms of companies and individuals. But it didn't take too much convincing, because I think a lot of the federal government, for much that's been said about the DoD and all the problems we just laid out, the DoD is innovating in a lot of ways. If you're being invited to speak at KubeCon and, open source security conferences, things like that, people are paying attention to what the DoD is doing in the software factory space. For example, we just saw the CNCF publish a secure software factory reference architecture. It looks very similar to the DevSecOps reference architecture that, the DoD has implemented across different agencies, or different programs, I should say. And I think the federal civilian agencies have been paying attention and just seeing, what some of the work that's being done at the Platform One, the Kessel Run, the other, software factory ecosystems across DoD. And I think they're starting to pay attention and see that, this is the way of the future to build a secure, robust platform, containerized environment, et cetera, that they can take advantage of. So they've been willing to use, core components of Big Bang, pre-hardened containers from Iron Bank, and lean into some of those things that have been, hard lessons learned, honestly, that weren't easy and took quite a lot of time and investment. So, we didn't have to do much selling in that context, but it is a cultural change. Like, as you can attest from Platform One, just teaching people to do things differently and have a different way of operating is, always a challenge.
Yeah. I mean, it's part of the learning, right? That's why I think, honestly, the biggest struggle we have is going to be empowering people to learn, and the self-learning aspect. And that's why I'm going to be focusing a lot of my time on this curriculum I'm creating for managers and non-technical people. But honestly, when I give it to technical people, they still like it because they are a little bit behind, and they catch up, and that's good too, right? But the curriculum is the learning, really empowering learning, is going to be so important, right? And it's not just, like you said, the catching up. It's also the keeping up to date and not getting behind. And ideally, you want to be leading. I'm always surprised when I see people say, China is catching up to us, and it seems like we're okay with it. We should be like Tesla, right? They're giving away the patents because they're moving so fast that they know that by the time people start using those patents, they're going to be miles away ahead, and people can catch up. And we should be the same in DoD, right? We're spending way more money than everybody else. But we're not moving at the same velocity. In fact, I would argue, when I talk to NATO nations and Five Eye that have way less money, I was talking to the 5-star general in France that's running cyber and space and army stuff, and he told me, the entire budget of the equivalent of DoD in France is 50 billion, which is what we spend. We spend 60 billion in software in DoD, just in software. That's the entire defense budget. And guess what? They get stuff done, and maybe there's less waste. There's one thing to be said about bloated and bureaucracy, and when you have too much money, you just become this massive organization that's just I've seen it even with software factories, right? When you become too big, right? There is a point where it just doesn't work, right? 80% of the work is done by 20% of the people. You've seen that too, right?
Yeah, it's kind of the Pareto principle. I think it kind of
Right.
it's pervasive everywhere, music or any kind of a creative endeavor almost. But yeah, no, I think it goes back to the luxury that we talked about, of being a world power and having the national superiority we do against many nations in terms of defense and things like that. We get comfortable with wasting quite a bit. And that's why you have fiefdoms and, people building in silos and not collaborating, and a lot of waste and fraud and abuse, in many places. And then also, like, our whole system is kind of, misincentivized in a lot of ways. We have the same traditional players, winning all the work, but not really delivering things in many cases. People often talk about that.
Yeah.
And I think there's something to be said, like you talked about, in terms of budgets. When you don't have much, you have to learn to be resourceful. We have plenty, and we've gotten used to being wasteful. And I think, that's a big problem that we need to try and address.
Yeah, I tell people we probably waste 90 cents on the dollar in duty. That's my take. Probably 60% of that is wasted just through acquisition nonsense, and it's funny how all this stuff was created to prevent waste. It's always, and I've seen it so many times where good ideas get turned into nightmares of policy, including some of my ideas. I remember when, I pushed the continuous ATO memo so it would be official, from the DoD CIO standpoint. Because it was really an Air Force Space Force construct. And so we created a bunch of documentation, tried to explain people at the DSOG and this what it was, and did many engagements with DoD CIO. And then there's a new DoD CISO coming with the new administration, and he likes the concept and great. And he ends up signing the memo, which is great, except they added a little sentence saying that every continuous ATO must go through him first to be approved, which was never part of the equation. And it's kind of funny, right? Because that team has never, ever done a continuous ATO. And yet you're saying now we have to go through you, including Air Force programs that have done it for 4 years, and you have no background or expertise in it. And so why would we go through you? I mean, you should go through us. It's easy how, great ideas or good concepts gets, with one sentence completely destroyed and becomes actually a problem as opposed to a part of the solution.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but I think we should be trying to empower folks and decentralize things to the extent possible. Like pushing everything back up to that single entity to try to review and approve everything is just not scalable. And, if we want to empower continuous ATO across the department, it's going to have to be something that's pushed down to, the AO at the more regional or local, programmatic level, because it's not going to be something that one entity can do at scale. I think we need to set some guardrails of what it is, how it should work, how it should look, and then let people run with that.
And we had the guardrails in the documentation. That's what's even more crazy. We actually set the stage to not need to do that because of those guardrails.
Yeah, I think just having that codified and communicated would have been good enough for kind of reining it into one entity that can say yes or no to everything. And as you talked about, like moving into an entity that's never really done it doesn't make much sense. You want to learn from the people that have done this, have innovated, have led the way on this. The other programs that have done this, the Kessel runs, the platform ones, and so on.
Yeah.
Learn from
honestly,
them.
it's all Danny Holzman. Danny Holzman is the only AO already in DoD that has understood and executed the CATOs of all these teams. So he's awesome.
Yeah, I saw a talk with him recently, and he's definitely got some good insights of having been in the trenches and having facilitated some of the early continuous ATOs that we've been seen signed into operation.
But you wanna know something funny? I think people are gonna have a heart attack. Guess what? The Air Force and Space Force have not found a way to extend Danny, and so his HQE is gonna expire in October, and he's gonna have to leave. And there's zero plan to replace him as an AO. There's no other AO trained on CATOs. There's over 50 programs, including F-35 and GBSD and Platform One and Cloud One and Kessel Run and whatever else, and RCU and ABMS and SAP programs, completely depending on Danny. And the answer is no answer. So, this is just like, I don't even know what to do anymore when I'm sending emails to SecAF and I say, hey, if you lose Danny, you're not going to be able to, which is kind of scary, right? We should probably not be in a situation where we're so dependent on one person. I get it. But the fact is we all, whether we like it or not, I felt the same. I felt, I'm so, when I left, we did a list of the stuff I was doing, and then my leadership came back and said, this is what 17 SCS, we would need 17 SCS to replace you. I was like, why? I'm just one person. This is just too much work. and then of course they dropped most of the work. They didn't actually put 17. In fact, they didn't even replace me whatsoever. But they actually dropped the work. So they say software matters, but then there was no replacement. And the all this work of like joint engagement with OSD and DoD CIO and this went down the trash. And and then you start to see more memo, pushing more OSD nonsense. And when you start not having good representation in these meetings, you'll be shocked at the stuff I prevented from happening. A lot of people talk about the stuff I achieved in the department, but they don't know the stuff I prevented from happening. That was bad stuff, by being there. Which one might debate which one is more impactful, but I can tell you, my take on all these policies and pushing some of these memos, I've changed because I've seen how they can be turned on their head and become the problem instead of being the solution.
Yeah, I mean, we have a real bad habit of putting things in the policy or a compliance, right, and then just that's what we work towards versus actual impact in many cases. I'm sorry, and it
Yeah.
is unfortunate to hear that about Danny. I think that kind of touches on the whole retention topic that we discussed, and like also we should be having robust training to train other AOs of how
Yeah.
they're doing. How are these people having these level of success? How are they doing these kind of things? And I did want to give a shout out to Matt Houston, who I recently met with and
Yeah.
worked with at Platform One. He's a very sharp individual, and I hope that he stays in the ecosystem because he's someone that really gets it as well.
Yeah, it's probably gonna have to help when Danny leaves, honestly, because he's probably the only one that can do some of that work. Although he's just an AODR today, so he's not a full AO. But so Lauren will have to change that. But I can tell you, the other problem is quite honestly the AOs are often mandated to be SCSs, and very very few, if any, are technical at all.
Yeah,
And so you don't find a Danny.
Yeah, that goes back to what we talked about of having people in the position who actually have the relevant experience. Like if you're going to be signing off the risk of a technical system, you should be technical and understand the technologies involved, the processes, the tools, etc. Because it's really hard to determine the risk of a system if you don't even understand how the system works, what technologies it's using and things like that. And that's
they rely on their teams. I mean, I can tell you, AOs don't make they have to rely on the teams of the SCAs and ISSMs to give us the documentation, and it's a compliance exercise. It should be a risk assessment, right, and understanding the actual risk, but it's not. It's just checking boxes, and the Compute 2 is such a different approach that they struggle with that, right? They don't understand the concept of continuous anything, let alone looking at dashboards of real-time risk assessment and seeing the actual real-time risk of software and infrastructure and platform and reuse of code. And honestly, Danny has been really thinking outside the box to get this done. And there's back to Brian's point here, some discussions about him maybe collaborating with DoD CIO, but I can tell you if he does, or if he joins the CIO and lead the CATO effort, that's not going to really help the Air Force, because let's face it, when someone is really a part of a OSD shop, they don't continue doing program level service work. They're not going to let that happen. So how are we going to replace, uh, the AO for the 40 most important programs on the planet? That's just mind-boggling to me that we're in a situation where I'm bringing it up because I actually want to raise awareness, and people are really are going to wake up and realize, because I know we have a lot of pretty high level people joining the show, including several undersecretaries and different kind of appointed roles listening. So I hope they understand that this is the kind of stuff that can break us, like for real. Like this is not something you recover from. And I struggle as to how an organization that's supposed to be designed around resiliency and scale, right, gets to that state. I felt also like maybe it was my ego, and maybe that's true, but I felt like I was doing so much stuff, and there was no one to replace me, and it was a lot of stress. It was a lot of probably why I stayed a little bit longer than I would have, because I felt like I was dropping the ball if I was going to leave. But then you got to a point where it was just too toxic for me and for the department. But I think, how do we solve that talent problem? I can tell you the HQE model is a great avenue to do that. But in Danny's use case, they just failed at doing something pretty simple. So that leads me to believe that it's not just it cannot be incompetence, because the guy is in the job. So then it's about going back to the status quo and going back to before. I can tell you a lot of the work that Dr. Roper has done, including, hiring me and Preston Dunlap and creating a chief architect and a chief software office, has been completely erased after, the new administration started, because it was no, we're not gonna, we don't like Dr. Roper, and we're not gonna keep any of the stuff he's done, even if it was good stuff. That's a very, that's why, the turnover of administrations and politics in all this game is just hurting the DoD so much.
Yeah, I mean, just to touch on a couple of things you said, like the polarization at the political level is very damaging. I think we're losing sight of the bigger picture and being one unified nation with, one overarching goal. And then it happens within the department too, among different, service branches and things like that. And, touching on the AO concept, like it's unfortunate that we may lose him. But I've also experienced that issue across all levels underneath them. You talked about how the folks underneath them inform them. I've authorized many cloud systems in different environments, and many times the AODR, the SCAR, the SCA, the ISSO, the ISSM, a lot of those folks don't have familiarity with cloud native systems, DevSecOps, because they spend most of their time in Excel and PowerPoint and things like that. They don't get an opportunity to work with the actual development and operations teams and understand the technologies. So I think we need broad training across that entire cybersecurity ecosystem when it comes to authorizing systems, to actually understand the modern technologies involved and better empower those AOs at the top to make those decisions.
So you know what? You just just gave me the idea of my next course after I finish this 45 segments of digital transformation and DevSecOps. I'm gonna do a whole. I have one segment of the 45 on continuous ATO. It's not bad, but it's not deep dive. I'm gonna have to focus on creating the right training for the SCAs and ISSMs and all the way to the AOs to understand continuous ATO and understand modern cyber principles. I think that's actually a great idea. So I'll make sure to partner with you, at least let you give us insights on this stuff, because of course with your background, it's exactly the kind of feedback we need to create the right content.
Yeah, I'll just give a plug. It's not DoD or government specific, but definitely check out the Cloud Security Alliance CCAK. It's cloud certification for auditors, because there's a big gap among the auditing and assessment community when it comes to cloud and DevSecOps, and they've done a great job of really teaching those concepts in a way that it relates to the auditor and it's technical enough without necessarily being way down in the weeds beyond their job and responsibility too.
Yeah, and CSL is really doing a good job. So I'm glad you're involved in a lot of that stuff, because I was always pretty impressed with the publications and the stuff they've been pushing for the last many years. So this is good stuff. So we need to talk about software supply chain a little bit, because obviously that's a hot topic between the risk management side and the supply chain and software bill of materials. So in your opinion, when you see what's happening, what should we do about both of these kind of hot topics?
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting problem, and it's not necessarily a new phenomenon, but I think it's something that we're starting to pay more attention to as an industry, and I think it's because malicious actors are also paying more attention to it. I think there was like a spike of 300% in the last year of software supply chain attacks, and I think it's because malicious actors realize that instead of targeting one entity, they can target an entity and have a cascading impact across the entire ecosystem. And we are seeing some really promising things. The White House held a open source software security summit in January. We just had OpenSSF publish their open source security mobilization plan. It has like 3 overarching goals and 10 kind of substreams associated with that. I definitely recommend checking that out. And then obviously we have things coming out of NIST like SSDF. They just published SSDF, and they're looking to have software companies kind of a self-attest, which is another can of worms that we can get into if we want, but self-attest to their SSDF compliance when they're selling software to the government, for example. And then also another plug for NIST, their 800-161 CSCRM, Cybersecurity Supply Chain Risk Management guidance, is pretty robust. And they have an Appendix F, which is really focused on the open source software aspect of things. So it is a really challenging problem, and I think it's one that we're starting to pay more attention to, thankfully. And I'm glad that we're starting to see some traction for things like SBOM and VEX, and more rigor around just managed service providers, cloud service providers, and how critical they are to the ecosystem. Starting to put some rigor around that, because the malicious actors have realized the value of it, and they're definitely taking advantage of it. When you look at whether it's vendor proprietary stuff like SolarWinds and the impact of that, open source software like Log4j, or managed service providers like CISO, they're all kind of being targeted now because they essentially have such a broad reach across the ecosystem.
Yeah, particularly cyber companies, but you've seen lapses go after the source code of many key companies
Yeah.
like Okta, like Microsoft, like Samsung, and people move on, right? People move on with their lives when the source code gets stolen. It's like, oh, no big deal. What they don't understand, right, is people are going to use this access to the source code of these products to find 0 days, and we're going to see a wave of breaches on these products because now they can go behind the scene and see exactly how everything is architected. And that's a massive enabler for malicious actors to find entry points to different systems. So that's going to be very interesting to for people to realize that their DevSecOps platform and pipeline and source code repo is now their crown jewel.
Yeah, I think SolarWinds and a couple other associated attacks started to emphasize that, like, we got so caught up in what's coming out of the pipeline, right? Ensuring that was secure, it's been scanned, SaaS, DAS, secret scanning, all those kind of things. But then we're realizing, like, oh wow, the pipeline itself is actually an attack vector, a massive one.
Yes,
Because if you can
the
compromise
build
that,
server and the source code. Yep.
yeah, you can poison everything coming out of it, and you can sign it so it looks legitimate and people trust it. So people are starting to secure their build pipeline like they should be securing their production systems, because it can have such a cascading impact coming off of that to many consumers, whether it's internal to your org or external. If you're producing software and distributing it to consumers downstream. So definitely much of an emphasis on the build platform as well, and I think that's where we're seeing. I didn't mention this previously, but if you look at Salsa, kind of spearheaded by Google, supply chain security. They have levels of assurance. 0 through 4, 0 obviously being nothing, and 4 being hermetic builds, and the most level, highest level of maturity that many organizations may not need to meet depending on their industry and security requirements. But if you look to that, it's a great source of guidance of how to how do you build a robust software supply chain and how do you secure it appropriately.
Yeah, and that's going to be a big lessons learned, a set of lessons learned for companies. When you look at a maturity of DevSecOps teams, I think it's going to be a must for teams to start embracing the cattle construct to really make their entire DevSecOps stack ephemeral and go back to immutable state multiple times a day. So they go back to non-state and they go back to their build server and all these tools being back to what they should look like. And having that ability to do it rapidly and multiple times a day is going to drive your maturity and your adoption of security. And it's crazy because if you look at most teams in the government, we're very far away from that stuff, and yet we're the most targeted organizations. And when I talk to a lot of the CIOs, we're barely scratching the surface of DevOps, let alone DevSecOps, let alone all these moving target defense, zero trust principle. If you look at DoD CIO, his desire is to get to zero trust in DoD by 2027. I would argue in 2027 it's probably gonna be something called differently. So by the time you get there, 10 years too late. I remember I pushed zero trust 6 years ago at DHS, and the guy in charge of CISA at the time, NPPD, told me he doesn't believe in zero trust yet, and he was pushing Einstein and all the parameter stuff that DHS has been doing for years, with billions of taxpayer money wasted. And he said no to deploying even a pilot of zero trust in critical infrastructure and power and water and stuff like that, which could have prevented some of the breaches we've seen also in that side of the house. But then they end up getting an award of best employee of the year of a year where they already had left the government. Right? It's just you can't make it up. It's just, how can you tell people to go and serve, take a pay cut, and go fight this nightmare, and then you see this kind of nonsense political. And by the way, he got it because he fought against Trump and said the election was the most secure election ever, which whatever it is or not. But the fact is, he said that, and that's why he got the award of the year. Yet he's the guy that prevented the government to adopt zero trust, and that's mind-boggling for the guy in charge of cyber in 2020. It's just, I don't know what to say.
Yeah, that's really unfortunate to hear. And I think, you touched on a lot of key concepts worth calling out, like personalities and politics aside, but like, moving to the immutable, ephemeral state of infrastructure, driving down the dwell time of adversaries, moving away from the kind of legacy concept of detection and prevention, where obviously we need to do those things, but resiliency is the key. And that's why, if you look at the NIST, Ron Ross has done a great job of really emphasizing their latest 160 publication that talks about resilient cybersecurity systems, for example. Definitely recommend checking out that. And then on the zero trust front, it is unfortunate that we've had programs, like JRSS and others that have kind of lasted as long as they did. We're eventually starting to, shed those kind of things. And I will say, that we are moving in a good direction. If you look at the federal zero trust strategy, the CISO zero trust maturity model that has come out, obviously DoD has published the zero trust reference architecture, how they're handling
paper. It's all paper. We need this stuff in prod. That's not going to stop China. They're going to read the paper. They're going, oh, this is great. This is a great piece of research.
Yeah, I think a friend of mine always says like a strategy is one thing, but execution is another. And I think that that's really emphasized here. Is like these are all great guidance and policies and processes and ways to start making impactful change. But we ultimately need to make that change and make those impactful changes across the department. And if we don't, like you said, I think that there's going to be consequences, unfortunately, and we're going to see them.
I mean, you would agree that we're already late, right? I mean, the DoD should already be behind a zero trust architecture in 2022, right?
Yeah, I mean, you look at folks like John Kindervag and Chase Cunningham and others in the commercial side who have been kind of beating the zero trust drum for over a decade. It has to be kind of disheartening for them to, look. I guess it has to be, good and bad in the sense they look and see that we are starting to adopt these things, but it took quite this long to get there. And we kind of clung on to that legacy security model for quite as long as we did. But, I hope that
we should be leaning when we're talking about weapon systems. And now we're talking about connecting all these weapons together to create this JADC2 magical IoT construct. If you do JADC2 without zero trust, you're going to put the nation at risk in terms of like actual tangible kinetic, risk. This is insanity. You can't do that. Those weapons were not designed to be connected.
Yeah, I mean, you're kind of like touching on the challenge or double-edged sword of connecting everything, right? And when you have ubiquitous connectivity across everything, now guess what your attack surface is? Everything.
Particularly without zero trust. Without zero trust, at least that's a criminal decision. I told people like, don't do it if you don't have a zero trust stack. What makes me mad, and people get upset when I get upset on LinkedIn, but the fact is, maybe I know a little bit more than they do on the reason why I get upset. But you look at the zero trust pilot of DISA, right? So they refused to use the cloud native access point that we created in the Air Force Space Force, which was the largest implementation of zero trust that we've done in 45 days. By the way, thanks to Matt and Danny and all the team building the stack and stuff, right? So we built a zero trust stack. We put it on class secret environments. We demonstrated you can do cloud and on-premise environments, all good stuff. And then, time to scale, right? Time to grow. DoD start talking about zero trust. Great. We briefed them on CNAP. They released the CNAP reference design. This DoD CIO signs it as something that's now available and accepted without a waiver, right? Great. All great things. And then, DISA gets some money to create a program to start implementing zero trust. And what they end up doing is, again, going back to the prime model where they pick one big prime. And the worst, right? What drives me insane is they say, well, we picked them because they said they could do it in 6 months, and we thought having a second option to the CNAP would be great. And that makes sense, I guess, right? When you say you want to have more than one, okay, but then they failed to deliver, right, after 6 months. And by the way, the 6 months cost was 6 times the cost of what CNAP cost. So it's for the full year. So it's already like 12 times more expensive, and so that's one piece of data, and we did it in 45 days. So we're already 6 months. So that's already way more time. And then on top of that, now they're saying, well, we couldn't get it done, so we're gonna need an 18 months extension. I mean, sit down, right? 18 months. So now you're gonna pay not only 12 times, but you're gonna probably end up paying 24 times to get just to basic unclass capabilities. And I'm like, you don't have an excuse to say you want to do it, have 2 options now. This is not like a quick pilot thing where you're just playing with stuff and see what sticks. You're now saying it's going to be a 2-year engagement. And that's where you lose me. And the fact that they put a guy in charge of this program initially, that literally was the same guy when I started the Cloud Native Access Point, that told me he went to a conference the week prior and heard about this thing called Zero Trust, but he didn't believe in it, or he wasn't sure if he should believe in it. We were already pushing Zero Trust and for years, right? And at least on the commercial side, and he's the guy who slowed us down to get the Cloud Native Access Point accredited, and now he's in charge of the program and seen as the Zero Trust guru of DoD, right? Who has never done it and know nothing about it. It's just, this is who we picked to get the job done, and then we wonder why now it's going to be a 2-year journey instead of 45 days when I did it. But guess what? I had the expertise and knowledge of years of doing this kind of stuff, right? And yet they don't want to reuse it. So that leads me to a beautiful transition of how do we make software more reusable, and how do we adopt this modular architecture so we can finally reuse pieces of software. It's not just about APIs and connecting things together. That's why people don't understand. Everybody talks about APIs all day long. They miss the point. In modular weapon systems, if you look at SpaceX, 80% of the platforms are reusing the same Lego blocks, and then 20% is customized Lego blocks, which accelerate the ability to create a new platform in a matter of days. A sensor on the jet could be reused as a sensor on a ship. That could be a container that's a modular piece that's reusable as a Lego block. That's not an API you're going to connect. That's completely different stuff. What do you think? How do we get there? How do we make software more reusable?
Yeah, I mean, you just touched on it honestly, and then we've touched on it throughout the conversation. But it's moving to that declarative infrastructure as code,
Mm-hmm.
kind of concept, kind of containers, pre-hardened containers, and having a construct where people can reuse things that have been done by other program offices, other entities, and aligning with those reference architectures. For example, CNAP is a good one. We had the CNAP reference architecture finally got published, and unfortunately, for folks like me, I spent years trying to work with the legacy BCAP model with the Navy, the Defense Health Agency, and it was a real nightmare. No one enjoyed it. I guess it was a major bottleneck when you talk about bandwidth and things like that. And it took us years to move the CNAP, move the access point closer to the workloads that we're trying to protect. And it was a really bad example of how to do something. To be honest, it took way too long. But I'm glad that it
And by the
got
way,
done.
when I started the stuff, people told me it would never happen. I was wasting my time. If I listened to people, I would have never even tried.
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate that it took as long as it did, but I'm glad to see some departments and agencies and program offices starting to look to the CNAP model and try to recreate that now. But they should be doing that in a way that they're leaning into what exists. If it's in a declarative state, if we have pre-configured in deployments, whether it's a vendor agnostic, Terraform kind of construct and pre-hardened containers.
Terraform, IC stuff. So.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, people can take that and redeploy it. We shouldn't have this being done in a kind of ClickOps bespoke, every unique snowflake deployment. It should be done in a standardized, way that aligns with the reference architecture. And I don't understand why we can't move towards that versus everyone trying to recreate something from scratch. I understand
What do you think? I must have failed somewhere, right? To show them, even after they extend for 18 months. I mean, okay, the first 6 months I gave them a pass. They wanted to have a second option. I kind of knew they were bullshitting, but I said, okay, I mean, you have a valid point. At least it's a good excuse, right? I knew they wanted to do their own thing, but I kind of can play pretend. But then they extended 18 months, right? So no, you don't have, that doesn't make any sense. So what could I have done to tell people, like, we have the IAC. I told them that it's automated push button deployment. You can reuse it. We could merge the team. We could do a joint team. I tried everything with this on this. What am I missing? There must be something that I'm not saying that I need to say to make sure this happens.
Well, I can't speak for everyone, but like we said in the beginning, you have a polarizing personality. So people either love you or hate you. So I think depending on who's saying the message.
But I've been gone for a year. So no more of that excuse, right? I mean, the people trying to negotiate this stuff now, and it's not even me, right?
Yeah, I think
that's a great excuse. I like it, right? But by the way, all these decisions were made after I was gone. So there was no Momnik, no fighting, no whatever. There was a PM trying to say reuse the stuff. Steve Hesserholz, who is an awesome guy now at FDIC because he got so frustrated of the Air Force, he left. Right, this guy is the nicest. I mean, he's literally the nicest guy on the freaking planet. I put him in charge because he's not only the smartest guy on Zero Trust that I know, but he's also like the nicest guy on the planet. Went to build partnerships, and guess what? Nothing happened. So what else? There must be something else. There's something that we're not thinking about that's making us fail at partnering and doing joint teams?
Yeah, I think a lot of it may come back to the system and incentivization. People want to do things that they can claim that we created X, or resume driven
Yeah.
development, as they call it. And obviously, there's incentives for primes, big primes, to go get new contracts and awards and funding and things of that nature. But that's why I think we need to have some level of leadership that drives rationalization across our portfolio. We shouldn't have these things being recreated over and over and over again for additional costs. If it already exists, if it's already working, it's functional, it aligns with the reference architecture. Why are we recreating these things?
Yeah, I mean, there's no practical reason as to why someone would do this, unless it's really, I underestimate the power of the primes, right? To push, I guess, somehow people to do it. I mean, it's just,
Well,
I don't see anything else. And by the way, CNAP is a company. It's not a single prime. The government is the integrator. It's the right way of doing business, right? We're in control. We don't get locked in. There's no magical, black box showing up to our desk, right? Which is kind of what Booz is selling in this case, right? It's a turnkey, alleged, magical zero trust stack with Palo Alto. And funny enough, it is the competitor to the companies we ended up picking on the CNAP. And honestly, these companies were not even doing really zero trust at the time. They kind of trying to, no, everybody calls themselves zero trust, right? It's kind of easy. I would argue they're not really doing zero trust, but that's a different story. So do you think it could be the fact that really this is kind of the do the primes have such power over government people that this kind of stuff happens?
I mean, it's no secret that we have a revolving door. If you look at, it's not uncommon for a very senior, federal civilian individual or a military leader, to move from their position to a big government prime, to a very, comfortable, well-paid, well-connected position. And then they start to exploit their Rolodex from there. That's very common that we see that, unfortunately. And it happens obviously on the government side too, outside of tech, but on the government side more broadly. So that revolving door is really pervasive, and it's I think that's a part of what why we see what we do. And ironically, some of the companies that were involved in CNAP, you didn't name any of them particularly, but I know some of them. And if you go look at NIST also, they have the NCCOE. If you go take a look at that, they just released, a guidance on implementing a zero trust architecture. Guess who's in there? Some of the same companies that were using the CNAP deployment. So here we are. NIST is now recommending these same companies that were part of CNAP. Several years later. So why it wasn't adopted and why it wasn't reused doesn't make much sense to me, honestly.
By the way, it's also a common sense decision, right? A lot of people were pushing to look at some of the competitors that were not even supporting classified use cases, saying, oh, we're going to figure out later. CNAP can support all classifications from day one because the mandate was to have no drift between classification levels, and the stack has to run on our clouds and our on-premise environments, and the control plane cannot be a freaking SaaS. You're not going to give the keys to the kingdom of DoD. I couldn't even believe when I heard this say we're gonna host the policy enforcement point decision on the cloud on the third party SaaS service. This is criminal. I mean, you cannot do this. This is just, you give the keys to the kingdom, and that stuff doesn't even run on the high side, so you can't even get to the real meat of zero trust. So it just makes no sense. And yet you have another company that's done it and works, and it works anywhere at the edge and on clouds and on space satellites, and you're not going to use it. Why? What's the reason? Right? That should be a technical requirement to be able to run on the high side.
Yeah, right? If you think about it, you're talking about, needing to have standardized deployments and repeatable deployments regardless of the classification level. And ironically enough, if you look at the federal, FICAM, federal ICAM strategy, they're very big proponents of moving to identity as a service, which is a SaaS-based identity as a service model. So I'd be interested to see, some dialogue between you and maybe the federal CISO council or something like that. But
let's dig into this for a second, right? Because it's an interesting thing. My take is you clearly don't want to rebuild the stack, right? So I always want to be precise when I say stuff, because people put words in my mouth. So I'm not against software as a service that could be deployed on my cloud and managed by the third party, but it cannot be hosted as a multi-tenant stack elsewhere. You should probably not put zero trust or ICAM third-party SaaS hosted multi-tenant service. That's what I mean, to be precise. I'm not saying you should build your own ICAM stack from scratch and not use commercial products. I'm saying, an Okta, for example, right, that got literally breached recently, is probably not where you want to put your identity provider source of truth of all your freaking identity of DoD. You want to, if they were to support an Okta model where they give me a container and can host it on my Kubernetes stack, on my different clouds across multiple regions, on my DoD enclaves, now we're talking. And that's what we've done with their competitor of Ping. Ping was able to do that. That's why we picked it, because they were able to bring on premise, not because I like Ping more than I like Okta. I actually like Okta better, by the way. But the fact is they couldn't support hosting it on my premises. And by my premises, I mean, it could be a cloud, but it's my enclaves.
Yeah, you're getting down like, kind of driving down the shared responsibility model to where you have more responsibility and control that you feel comfortable with within your risk tolerance for DoD. You're talking of self-hosted models where you have some level of control over the instance and, the higher up the stack, for example. And I think that's what, it's a good call out so that people don't misunderstand what you're trying to say.
Yeah, it's also, the reason is it's your crown jewel, right? Your zero trust stack. And I'm not saying you cannot use SaaS for other stuff, but for identity management and zero trust policy enforcement point, it's your crown jewel, right? If someone breaches that, you're done, right? You can literally give access to the wrong people to your stuff. I mean, literally, right? Bypass MFA, like, right, fake identities, everything, right? So the ability of being able to control that, and by the way, have it ideally on your same Kubernetes orchestration stack with your same cyber stack, your same visibility. You have zero visibility on what Okta does as a SaaS. In fact, they were breached and took months to tell the customers they were breached. Is that the right thing you want, to put your crown jewel in a place where you have no visibility, so you even know there was a breach? That just can't be the answer, particularly for DoD. I mean, okay, maybe some smaller agency can decide to take that risk, but I would argue if a product can deliver a SaaS-like service on my premises, and by the way, they do the support and maintenance in my cloud, so it's still kind of a SaaS. It's just in a place where I have visibility and I remove the multi-tenancy nonsense, which drastically augment the risk in terms of targeting, being targeted, right? So that's my vision.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I think depending on, like you said, the agency or the organization's risk tolerance, the level of control is going to look different. And then on the SaaS front, another plug for Cloud Security Alliance, we just published a SaaS security best practices guide. I definitely recommend looking into that because it touches on a lot of things you talked about when you talk about notification timelines and things like, it ties to SLAs and things of that nature. So if you're using a SaaS provider, you want to thoroughly vet that provider, how they're hosting, where they're hosting, who has access, response timeline.
And disclosure. No one talks about disclosure of breaches, right? I can tell you, no one asked that question, right? How quickly are you going to tell me you were breached? When am I going to know? There was 2.5% of customer impacted by the Okta breach, according to Okta, which I'm not 100% sure it's actually the truth, but let's assume they're not lying, which we have no way of actually verifying, by the way. But okay, you take it for granted. But some of these people took months to find out they were part of the 2.5%. How is that acceptable?
Yeah, 2.5, sounds insignificant until you're a market leader like Aquia.
You look at the number of customers.
Yes, yeah. So it's definitely a good point to call out, and in that response.
By the way, if in the 2.5% is DoD, that's pretty good, right? So
I think SaaS has a lot of benefit, depending on the organization. But if you're an enterprise with the budget and the resources of DoD, for example, in many cases it may make sense to do things yourself or work with a partner, as you laid out, in kind of a shared model. So it really depends on the organization, your size, your resources, your risk tolerance is what's going to drive those technical decisions.
I can tell you, most of the SaaS companies I'm on the board of, I'm pushing them, and most of them were already doing it, but I'm really pushing pretty hard that they should be supporting a use case where they can deploy on my Kubernetes cluster, right? And provide the service and support as a SaaS, but deploy on my cluster through automation and, whether it's a Helm chart or Kubernetes operators, I don't care. But really, that model of delivery, I can tell you, in my opinion, is going to be in the next 5 years the default for most companies. I can tell you, I talked to CIOs of banks, telcos, healthcare companies. That's the only way they're going to consume those services. And they want it on their cluster. They want to have their cyber stack, their visibility. There's GDPR issues, if they start hosting stuff elsewhere with multi-tenancy. There's a lot of things that are making them say, I'm not going to do that. I want it on my cluster. I want to have the same visibility, the same zero trust enforcement, the same concept there. And my take is companies that don't support a use case where they can deploy on your Kubernetes cluster are going to be out of business, because SaaS alone is not going to cut it, particularly for these kind of critical products. I might be wrong, but we shall see.
I mean, I've seen several cases already where organizations are considering a service offering, and they'll ask, can we use self-hosted? And if it's not an option, it has been a deciding factor in some cases, depending on the organization.
Yeah, and many do it. I mean, if you look honestly on the spectrum of CNCF, because that's kind of the point of Kubernetes, right? So many people that embrace Kubernetes and abstraction and can deploy everywhere. The issue is you see a lot of products completely getting locked into cloud providers, right? So they have some cloud services APIs that they're consuming, and now if you have to deploy this on my premises or whatever, I need to be on the same cloud, and you're creating additional constraints. So that's why it's so important, right, to be modular and reusable and bring the stuff with you. I'm not saying you can use cloud services, but you want to do it right. And I can tell you the companies I'm helping, part of the CNCF landscape, it's so essential that they're not dependent on a single cloud provider services. That just doesn't fly. Particularly if you want to do cyber stuff, or you want to do tracing, or you want to do service meshes, it's just not an option. You can't do that.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a push, for especially in highly regulated and sensitive environments like the self-hosted model that you're talking about, and then also, just moving towards more of a kind of a risk assessment of, should we put all of our eggs in one basket for one cloud service provider? We're seeing more and more organizations move towards multi-cloud and kind of have best of breed depending on the service they want to consume and what their use case is. We see that obviously with DoD and JEDI and JWCC, but that's another conversation. But nonetheless, I think we are seeing a push to multi-cloud, depending on what are we trying to do, what's our use case, and then that kind of dictates, how far we push into the cloud service offering.
I mean, some companies, for some organization, it doesn't matter too much, right, to be agnostic and hybrid. For DoD, I really believe it's a must. I don't think you can succeed. You're talking about deploying at the edge on jets and bombers, and you want to be anywhere, and you want to run without a cloud provider API kind of stack. So you need that day one for most use case. So I think it's just better to architect it that way, and then have a bunch of containers and be modular and reusable, and have these Lego blocks in Iron Bank and all that kind of stuff. For other agencies, I think the other piece that they forget is sometimes you have a cloud provider that come up with a pretty innovative thing, and now you can consume it because your current provider does not have it yet. And so, okay, you could easily start say, well, we're going to connect the cloud and do different things. You could do that, but being architected to be agnostic, because the minute you have a second cloud provider, you need to bring identity, you need to bring all these abstraction layers and all this security stack. If you start having two security stacks, two identity stacks, it just doesn't work very well. And that's what we did with Cloud One, having that abstraction layer for cyber and for identity management. And so people with an account could connect to both clouds without having to, have two accounts and stuff like that. That's a proper way to scale hybrid cloud. And most people don't even understand the problem yet.
Yeah, I mean, it really gets to, like I talked about, the system maturity model. If you look at their zero trust maturity model, like federation of identity providers is a key component of that. And you're touching on that, when you talk about multi-cloud and moving from one cloud provider to another, or even on-premise, you need to have that kind of cohesive identity strategy to successfully scale in that kind of an environment.
Yeah, so you talked about it a little bit, but I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the continuous accreditation stuff and the CATO. It kind of ties back to some of the work, you guys are doing also with the kind of the virtual CISO and compliance as code and all that kind of work. Tell us a little bit about your thoughts on continuous accreditation. Is it really the future and kind of the only way to accredit? Do you still see a need of using the legacy way of accreditation, or do we just move and embrace it and that's the way to go and move on?
So I personally think it's definitely the future. Obviously, depending on what kind of environment and what tech stack you're talking about, it's going to be more difficult to accomplish. If you're not in the cloud, for example, it's going to be challenging. But when we talk about, you look at the DevSecOps and the reference architectures and trying to move at the speed of relevance, the terms that we hear so many times. But more broadly, definitely DevSecOps adoption. I don't see how we how we successfully achieve that with the legacy, 3-year cyclical ATO approach. I mentioned that I have 4 kids. This kind of always reminds me of like, I check their room, it's clean. I come back in a year, like I come back in another year. Like that's not getting you real continuous monitoring and having a level of assurance around the risk of your environment in near real time. So
We're not be a great parent at that point. Yeah. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure
would not want.
agree.
They would
If you
not
go
want
every
me.
5 years, hey, is it okay? All good?
Yeah, but no, I mean, nonetheless, I think that if we want real continuous monitoring, we want a real level of assurance around our environment, which ties to zero trust and a lot of the concepts we talked about. Continuous ATO, continuous RMF, if you're in the Army, the term they use, or more broadly, RMF, actually calls it ongoing authorization. That's the term we use here at CMS. We need to have that because it's going to be impossible to have that iterative delivery of software and value, to the production environment if we're using the legacy, paper-based 3-year cycle of ATO cycles. It's just not going to scale. It's not going to work.
No doubt. That's for sure. So I guess when you look at the adoption of continuous ATO, that leads us, of course, to OSCAL and compliance as code. What is that foundational? And how much do you see people even understand like the work you're doing now with that agency? Do they start to understand OSCAL and do they see the importance of it yet?
Yeah, they definitely do. That's what's really neat. I'm sorry. CMS is an early adopter of OSCAL. They've been working closely with GSA and also FedRAMP PMO too, and NIST to be an early adopter of OSCAL. Obviously, it's not agency wide, and it's going to be a journey to get to that point. But I think everyone's realizing like this legacy approach of paper-based documentation when we're moving at deployment speed that we're trying to get to, that paper-based approach is not going to scale. And we talk about being modular and reusable. The same concept applies to compliance. If I'm deploying, the CNAP reference architecture, for example, over and over again, or DoD infrastructure as code, I shouldn't have to manually document these things over and over again. I should have that documented as code in OSCAL format so that it could be reused. It can be modular. It can be a component. If I'm deploying Splunk or I'm deploying, X, Okta, whatever, that should be reusable in that context that, it's already been documented what controls it meets at what, what's, low, moderate, high, for example, system categorization level. It should be captured in documentation as code. So I definitely think that's the future. And we have seen the FedRAMP PMO accept their first SSP in OSCAL format. How quickly this will spread across the industry in terms of the federal and the DoD workforce remains to be seen. Like I said, there's a lot of problems when it comes to the assessment and the compliance workforce. But I definitely think if we're moving to infrastructure as code, compliance as code, that's definitely where we need to see things go in terms of OSCAL for documentation. And then, just shifting to the compliance as code aspect of things, I was an early advisor to a company that had TerraScan. They were called Curix, and they got acquired by Palo Alto, actually. But or not Palo Alto, but Tenable, I want to say. But, nonetheless, you should be able to bake in your compliance requirements, your security requirements into your infrastructure as code, manifest and scripts. If we shouldn't have open buckets, if we need to have encryption at rest, if, all these kind of configuration requirements should be baked in so that we're not pushing things to production and then coming after the fact and going, oh, wow, we've had a publicly exposed bucket for, 7 weeks. You could have caught that earlier in the pipeline, before it ever went to a production environment. So I think compliance as code is really helping you shift security left, shift compliance left, catch vulnerabilities earlier in the life cycle, and automate a lot of the manual activities that people will go around. I remember the days where people would, shoulder surf. Hey, can you log into this system, take a screenshot, and show me that this configuration is set as X? Like, no, it should be declarative. You should be able to audit that in an automated fashion, and that's the direction that we're headed, and that's the direction that we need to go.
Yeah, configuration as code and GitOps, and it's so essential. To get to that cattle ephemeral state, you can't get there without it. And I've been pushing pretty hard, several companies, but of course I'm on the board of SD Element, the product that does a lot of the compliance automation stuff for Casaran and others, and I've pushed pretty hard for them to fully embrace OSCAL, and it's happening. So that's the other piece of OSCAL, right? That's the challenge is very few products yet support it, and of course it's a massive lift. For people to start generating all this stuff if there is no turnkey ability to automate that whole process, and so companies like RegScale and SD Elements are fully embracing OSCAL. I was actually very impressed also by RegScale and the ability to completely end-to-end support OSCAL all the way to the poems and the profiles, and so it's a massive lift. OSCAL might be actually it's so powerful and so flexible that it's a very complex thing to implement, and most products out there that do GRC or some type of risk management thing have a very tough time even understanding how this works.
Yeah, I mean, we've touched on continuous ATO or ongoing authorization, whatever term you want to use. We touched on compliance as code, infrastructure as code, and DevSecOps. The GRC thing is a major problem. You look at the legacy GRC tooling like EMAS, for example, or on other federal agencies use Archer, for example. They're not using OSCAL native formats. They don't have APIs that you can interact with off your pipeline, your CI systems, and things of that nature. I see Dr. Mark Smiley there. Hope he's doing well. But nonetheless,
he was the most impactful guy I've met on MITRE to get not only dozens of my publications done, including the continuous ATO guy, and most of the schemas I use in my training came from Mark. So I'm thankful for his service to our nation.
Yeah, he's awesome. I had a chance to collaborate with him on the continuous ATO guide at one point, and be a peer reviewer and such. But yeah, those GRC systems, I think if we're going to move towards DevSecOps and continuous monitoring and near real time, pushing code to production on a regular basis, like the legacy GRC system of hand jamming all that in, it's just not going to scale. But we do need modern systems like RegScale is an awesome innovative capability. I know the founders really well, and they're building a real product. They've done this. They've been in the trenches at other agencies, doing this kind of work. Yeah. So they're bringing that wealth of experience and really innovating in this space to help agencies and commercial clients as well. On the whether you're HIPAA or SOC 2 or on and on. Yeah.
I'm actually very good at criticizing products, as you know, and when they did the demo of their solution, it's probably one of the rare, maybe the first time, where I couldn't come up with one thing to criticize. So that tells you a lot about the quality of the stuff they built. I was pretty upset about myself. I was trying to do a little bit better than that, but I couldn't literally come up with a decent thing. I think I came up with a bullshit, like they were not supporting SAML for authentication, so I had to come up with something, but that's just anecdotal, so.
Yeah, we'll call you the Simon Cowell of product assessment.
Yeah. So how you talk about the training before, right? A little bit. We talked about keeping up. When you look at your company, you're the co-founder of Aquia, right? You have people. You have to make sure they don't start. I assume you have to make sure they don't start getting 20 years behind since you hired them. That's kind of a lot of people make in terms of mistake, right? They buy, they get excited, they hire a great talent, right? They love the expertise, and then they stop investing in them to learn, and then they wake up 2 years from now and they realize they are completely obsolete, and that's only because of the leadership not empowering them to go and learn and giving them the time and the tools to do that. What do you think about when you look at your staffing and your manning, and how do you streamline or facilitate the learning? Do you share some of the sources and I love also to get maybe your top 3 sources of content that you personally keep up with outside of my show, which is obviously number 1, but the 3 other would be great.
Yeah, I mean, from a company perspective, like we realize that being a services-based company, like our people are our number 1 asset, and they are allowing us to go out and compete and win work and make an impact and drive mission outcomes. So we have a very robust training budget. We encourage people to use it every year. We have company subscriptions to places like Pluralsight and A Cloud Guru or Code Cloud or some of my primary sources you talked about.
Let's use A Cloud Guru. I heard a lot about it. You like it?
Yeah. And if you want to talk cloud native, I can't talk well enough about Code Cloud. KODEKLOUD. Very heavy emphasis on Kubernetes, containers, Istio service mesh. They have some really amazing courses that I've used to pass Kubernetes courses myself. Then also Linux Foundation has been putting out some pretty decent DevSecOps course. I took their CKNA course that they have, Kubernetes Native Associate course or Cloud Native Associate course, I'm sorry. And those are some of the virtual training platforms, but we also encourage people to, not only go out and learn, but also we have a certification bounty, a 3X. So if it costs you, $300 to take an exam and you pass, we'll pay you $900. Trying to incentivize people to take exams. And then also not only take it, but go ahead and share that knowledge. So we try to encourage people to go out, and if you take an exam, you pass it, write a blog post about it, talk about your experience, what you learned, how you learned, share that knowledge with the community, both internal to the company and obviously external to the the broader community through our website and things like that, our blog. I think that's a big thing. And then also, like, I'm a big proponent of brown bags. If someone has niche expertise, like, maybe they're really well versed in purple teaming or Kubernetes attacking, those kind of things, come share that conversation with the team. We have people that have unique expertise in threat modeling and things like that, and it's great to hear from them and share that knowledge among the team. So we try to create that culture. And then obviously me, I'm always pushing to learn, to read, to write, to publish things. So I think that hopefully that gives a culture of, hey, we want to keep learning. Yes, exactly. I'm trying to lead by example in that regard. And I hope that, the federal agencies can do something similar in terms of training budgets and certification bounties and other innovative ways to bring learning and content. Because I'll say, when I was a federal employee, I had to fight tooth and nail just to get reimbursed. And if I'm taking an AWS certification, for example, I took like 8 of them while I was a federal employee, and it was hard to get reimbursed for those. We talk about how critical the workforce is, but we're not really investing in them. And that's something that, I wish we would have touched on a little bit more is, we talk about zero trust and cloud and DevSecOps and all these things. We're buying all the tools, but what about our people? We don't really invest in our people. And that's a really major problem, in my opinion.
Yeah, no doubt. We should have taken all these amazing DAU legacy classes, although the new stuff is getting better. But, that would have been free. Come on, you took the Amazon course? Oh. You should not have done that. That's why, that you can only blame yourself. No, I'm just kidding with you. It's obviously, DAU is finally waking up. So I think, I see some progress. They're actually buying access to Coursera and different platforms, and they're creating, deep learning capabilities and with, linking short segments together, right? So like 2 5 minutes, 10 minutes stuff, and putting it together as a course instead of like this massive, courses that takes hours, so they're getting there.
Yeah, I mean,
so you fund all this stuff, so you give access to like the Kobe stuff and the code stuff and the A Club Guru stuff. You pay as a company and you give access to your people.
Yeah, we purchase, subscriptions for the organization and allow people to get licensing and access to that, because so that they can continue to learn and continue to grow and provide value to ultimately our clients, as an organization.
Do you recall how much you end up spending on average per person on learning?
I'll say that, annually we have a $5,000 budget per person for conferences and certifications and training and like that, things of that sort.
Does that include the cost of these platforms?
No, that's in addition to. Yes, that's an addition.
What about the platforms? You know how much that cost you?
I couldn't say offhand. Like, I have another co-founder.
Because a lot of people think it's super expensive, but I don't think it is. But
no, I pay, personally out of pocket for Code Cloud. I think I paid $120 for the whole year. Like, and I can use all their courses, Istio, Kubernetes, Service Mesh, all these different courses, like for $120. And they have browser-based labs. I can, jump right into a terminal and start working with, Kubernetes manifests and clusters and things like that. That's one thing I will say. Like, DAU is great. I'm old school. I can remember using Fed VTE, if people remember that amazing platform. But I think that DoD should lean into the existing service providers. There's a really robust and rich ecosystem of training providers out there. We don't need to create it all.
They started to do that.
Buy it. Yeah.
Yeah, I decided to do that, and same thing for the what is it, the Digital University at the Air Force. They're buying the Udemy and Coursera and Coursera side of the world.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so that's how you do it, and so you lead by example and you give the tools. And what about time? I used to say, give time to people to learn. Do you actually tell people to put time aside, that paid time, to go and learn, or it's just something they have to do extra to their normal hours, I guess?
Yeah, it's a combination of both. Like, I'm definitely a big proponent of encouraging, like, taking focus time. I'll even do that on my own calendar, like, carve out a few hours, throughout the week if I can. But obviously it's difficult in the role I'm in now, in the leadership role I'm in now, to take quite as much time as I used to. But I definitely encourage folks to do that. And then honestly, like, if you're passionate about this stuff, you're learning all the time, even in your, I'm listening to podcasts when I'm working out or going for a run. I'm listening to like the latest conference on YouTube or something like that. Like, I'm always learning. And I think that that's something you need to really make part of your daily habit to keep up with things. So I definitely try to recommend folks do that too.
And so when you think about, people on the service contract, right? Many of those SIs, argue that those people are full-time dedicated to a customer, right? So they often get stuck in time and stop learning, And even when I talk to some of these guys, they're like, "Yeah, but that's not part of the work they're doing now. Why would they learn it?" What's your take on enabling or convincing the final customer, to also let those people learn, so the talent they're paying for doesn't become stale?
Yeah, I think that's actually an interesting challenge, to be honest, because the way contracts work, there's no guarantee that the individuals doing the work for you now will be the individuals doing the
Mm-hmm.
work in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of tough to convince making an investment in a group of people who may not be the ones doing the work in 2 years, for example.
Yeah.
So, but
But they
I
might.
would love.
But there's this image, right? I forgot the meme, that's saying, what if, I think it's the CFO that says, what if
Yeah,
we invest in the people, right? And they leave, and they say, what if we don't, and they stay, right?
yeah.
So
I mean, I literally have left.
because they stay too, and then they're not very good,
Yeah, no, I've literally left roles for that reason. If they weren't willing to
right?
invest in me, I'm paying out of pocket. I'm a civil servant, not making much money, and I'm paying out of pocket to take these trainings, these certifications on my own time, and I can't even get reimbursed. Ultimately, people end up leaving. So you have to
Yeah.
invest in your people, because if they're not growing, and if they're a growth-oriented individual, their growth mindset, they're going to leave for someone that will put them first and invest in them. And I think that
In
we need to
fact, I
think
would
of
argue
that.
they might leave earlier, right? That if they left, it's probably because you didn't do it. If you did, maybe they would have stayed longer.
Yeah, if you're in an environment where you're facilitating growth and you're like encouraging people to grow professionally, to learn new things, to thrive, they're likely going to stick around. Versus if they feel like they're not valued, that you don't really care about the professional development, their growth, they're not going to stick around. And I think companies, and aside, as a broader DIB ecosystem, defense industrial base ecosystem, we need to think about that, because it is a small community at the end of the day, with a lot of the same companies and a lot of the same people. So we want to invest in them, because they're the ones ultimately helping us deliver for the warfighter or the citizen.
Yeah, and it's gonna pay back, right? And some may not, and some will, right? It's a kind of a balance, right? So I have one more question, but then I know we're almost out of time, but I have so many questions from the public, but we're not going to be able to do all of that. But we're going to do as much as we have time left. But my last question to you was, I guess it's tied to all this. I'm sure the answer is you were trying to do the best for you. But what made you partner and create your own business?
Yeah, I mean, some of it was, wanting to, like you said, do the best, for myself or my family and things like that. But also, I found myself in a situation where I was at some companies previously, great companies and great folks, and they were giving me opportunities to grow their cyber practice. And eventually, I started asking myself, like, why don't I try to do this myself, so that I have some more level of autonomy and be able to do things the way I think that should be done, or drive more of an impact. And that's kind of what led me down this path. And luckily, I found some partners that had also military backgrounds, a mission oriented mindset, and they wanted to bring a new breed of GovCon, for lack of a better term, to the ecosystem. People that actually code, people that actually keep up on technology, that do real security engineering and architecture, not just butts and seats type stuff. And that's kind of what led me down the path. And so far it's been a really interesting journey, not all easy at all. I've learned a lot of things, outside of cyber, when you talk about, primes and subs and contract vehicles and all these kind of things. I've learned so much. So it's been an amazing experience so far.
Yeah, and it's fun too, right? And I hope you end up making much more money too. But it takes time sometimes. But it pays off if you work as hard as you claim to be working. So, and I believe you. So, all right. So, questions from the public. Okay. So I'm gonna pick a couple of interesting ones. Sorry for all the others, but there's too many. All right. So let's start here. That's an interesting one. China is on track to graduate twice as many science, technology, engineering, and mathematics PhDs as the US by 2025. What should we all be doing to help advance our future generations?
Yeah,
And by
this
the way,
is
I'm gonna say, PhDs or not, I don't really care, but I think usually PhDs end up being a lot of researchers that don't bring that much value at the end of the day. But who knows? But I think the key is to learn the expertise, not so much the degree. But whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely something to be said between collaboration and knowledge sharing between academia and practitioners. But one thing is, like, obviously they have a much bigger population, so they're probably going to graduate more people than us. But the reality is, like, I don't think we're encouraging enough people to go into STEM. Look at STEM fields. Like, I'm an adjunct professor at 2 different universities. I have 4 kids. I think there's definitely some growing interest in those kind of fields, and fostering that interest among younger individuals. But I think we need to have many more programs starting at a much younger age. People are interacting with technology when they're very young. We need to be really driving that and encouraging that and fostering them be interested in coding and architecting and building things with technology. And also, just showing like what the number of opportunities are. When you talk about employment, people are taking on massive amount of student debt to graduate with a degree that's totally worthless. They can't get any employment for it. Showing them, hey, there's a lot of unfilled jobs that make a very good living in this career field. You should give this a look. I think that could be a very motivating factor as well.
Yeah, the most well-paid jobs are actually probably literally on the DevSecOps side. It's the only place where you can do a couple of years of experience and get a $500,000 salary. So anyway, I guess there's one question for you, and then I'll let you do the closing words. But then I have someone that asked me a question. I want to give him an answer. So I'll take the last question after you say your last final words. But before that, there's one more question here. We were talking about training, I guess. And so what if the leader is supportive of the training, but it never takes place because of scheduling, or, everything gets pushed and mission takes priority, or some other excuse? What do you say to that? I have my own answer, but I like to hear yours.
Yeah, this is, I think this is very common. You get so busy, right? And it reminds me of the meme where you see like the caveman pushing something and there's someone with a wheel and they say, we can't, we're too busy. It's kind of like that one a lot. Yeah, like if you're too busy to take time to learn and grow, like, eventually it's going to catch up and it's going to bite you. And I hope that leadership takes time. You kind of reiterate that to them, like, we need to carve out time for this. We need to be deliberate and intentional about this. And it's challenging. Like it is, you get busy, schedules get chaotic. But if you don't take time to learn, eventually you're going to stagnate and fall behind. So really try to get through to leadership about that. But ultimately, if you continue to try and they don't hear you, you may need to make a decision to check out another environment, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I kind of call BS on that, right? If it's one time, okay, but if it's continuous and it happens a second time and third time, then it's just a pile of excuses, and it's just never been a priority to your leadership, and it's just a toxic. It's just a poor excuse, right? It's just like people come up with different reasoning sometimes to justify stupidity, but I think in this case, one time, okay, but more than that, then you have to prioritize it, and people need to understand that not learning is getting behind, and getting behind is losing. So there's no excuse there. Always let the guest give last words, and then I'll take the question we talked about and tell people about the next guest. And of course, wanted to thank you for joining the show. It was a great session. But over to you for the last words.
Yeah, I mean, first off, just thank you for having me on the show. I've been following the content. Obviously I worked underneath you or associated with you on the Platform One side of things and watching your impact across DoD. But that said, like I'm thankful to be on the show and all the people tuning in. And honestly, I'm just, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm super active, and I'm really passionate about making a difference in federal cybersecurity and technology. And I'm thankful to be part of the ecosystem of all the great people we have. And I look forward to continue to collaborate with everyone.
Yeah, and you're honestly the only one I know that's getting anywhere close to my numbers on LinkedIn. So it's making me a little upset. So you're going to have to slow down a little bit, okay? Because you cannot become number one. That's not a thing. Okay, so you're going to have to slow down your game a little bit, okay? Because I can't keep up with you. So I'm a little, I'm old now, okay? So I don't know how old you are, but I'm 38. So, it's too much. I can't do this stuff anymore. All right, let's take the question from Joseph. So he was asking, it's funny to see my face on all the Platform One branding. He was curious if I think that Platform One will continue to be maintained at the same level after my departure. So first, it's important to understand that maintaining at the same level is not good enough, because we're going to get behind, and if we don't innovate and don't think outside the box, it's a problem. I've really spent a lot of time and raising awareness with SecAF and others and the leadership in DoD, about how important Platform One is, and I think it paid off, because Platform One was not funded from 2023 to 2026, and now it is fully funded. Money is a piece of the problem. My biggest fear is we lost 7 of the 8 founder of Platform One on the government side. So some of the vision and kind of the outside the box thinking is kind of disappearing. And once you have a lot of turnover after that, and there was no direct interaction between me or those founders and the new people, slowly but surely the story is changing, And my fear is that we don't really have that same vision. So I think it's something to pay attention to, and it's not just about maintaining stuff; it's also keeping the right vision and the right focus. And I've seen a few mistakes being made, but the good news is we have a good two-way street to raise awareness and make sure people pay attention. So far, I've seen both Mr. Hunter and Mr. Kendall, Secretary Kendall, really pay attention to it every time I send an email. So this was great. So I appreciate their devotion and their service to our warfighter. So it doesn't mean we just stop paying attention, but it's looking pretty good. But we need the right leadership, and we have a great leader with Brian Viola. So that's a good step. But you have to have that throughout the organization as well. The next guest on Tuesday, the 21st at 1 p.m. Is Nat. Nat is the co-founder and CEO of Aquia, and we're going to have a very interesting discussion on security about Cube Armor, which is a CNCF project, and eBPF, which is also a game-changing runtime security capability. So if you want to learn about what eBPF is and Cube Armor and App Armor and SE Linux and all that good stuff, which is mandated, by the way, in DoD, you should join us and hear what Naj has been pushing in the last few years as part of the CNCF work. So with that, I thank you for taking the time. Please subscribe on our YouTube channel and the mailing list so we can notify you of the next episodes and videos. In the meantime, everybody stay safe and make sure you invest in yourself to learn so we don't get behind, so our kids can have a fighting chance at winning against China 20 years from now. Thanks so much for joining. Stay safe.